36 seconds. That's how long Apollo 12 had been in the air when the first bolt hit. Not a near miss, not a warning, a direct lightning strike on a rocket carrying 3 astronauts, 950,000 liters of fuel, and the most complex machine humanity had ever built. Then 16 seconds later, it happened again, and almost nobody talks about it. November 14th, 1969, Kennedy Space Center, Florida. NASA was riding high. Apollo 11 had landed on the moon just 4 months earlier. The world was watching. The pressure to keep the momentum was enormous, but the weather that morning was wrong. Dark clouds hung low over the launch pad. Engineers on the ground noticed. Some flagged it. The concern was real, but the launch window was tight, the mission was ready, and the decision came down from above. They launched anyway. Commander Pete Conrad, Lunar Module Pilot Alan Bean, and Command Module Pilot Dick Gordon strapped in, counted down, and lifted off into a sky that should have grounded them. What happened next would come within seconds of ending the Apollo program entirely. At T plus 36 seconds, Apollo 12 triggered a lightning discharge. The rocket, climbing through electrified clouds at over 400 kilometers per hour, created a conductive path between the storm and the ground below. The bolt traveled straight through the spacecraft. Inside the command module, every warning light on the panel lit up simultaneously. Alan Bean later described it as looking at a Christmas tree. Except every light meant something was wrong, and he had no idea which ones to believe. The fuel cells, the power source for the entire mission, had tripped offline. The guidance platform had lost its reference. Without it, the spacecraft had no way of knowing which direction it was pointing. The telemetry feed from mission control went to static. On the ground, flight controllers stared at their screens, watching data turn to noise. For several seconds, nobody knew if the crew was alive. Conrad's voice came through the static.
I don't know what happened. I'm not sure we didn't get hit by lightning.
He was right. Twice. 16 seconds after the first bolt, a second lightning strike hit the spacecraft. This one was less powerful, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. The spacecraft was climbing, the crew was disoriented, and mission control was looking at data that made no sense. The Saturn V rocket itself continued to perform normally, but the command module was blind, powerless, and confused. If the crew couldn't restore power and reset the guidance platform before they reached orbit, the mission was over. And possibly, so were they. In mission control, a 26-year-old flight controller named John Aaron was watching data he had seen before. Not from Apollo 12. From a test more than a year earlier, during a simulation that almost nobody else had paid attention to. He knew what it meant, and he knew the fix. Aaron's voice came over the loop, calm and precise.
Try SCE to aux.
SCE to aux. Signal conditioning equipment to auxiliary power. An obscure switch. A backup configuration almost nobody trained on. Flight director Jerry Griffin heard it. Conrad heard it. But nobody in the capsule knew what it meant, except Alan Bean. Bean had seen that switch once, in a simulation months earlier. He had asked what it did. He remembered the answer. He reached across the panel and flipped it. The data came back online. Mission control exhaled. But the crisis wasn't over. The fuel cells were still offline. The guidance platform was still lost, and they were running out of time. One by one, Aaron walked the crew through a precise sequence of resets, fuel cell by fuel cell, system by system. The spacecraft came back to life in the minutes before it needed to be operational. Apollo 12 reached orbit on schedule. Here's what nobody tells you about that morning. If John Aaron hadn't been at that console, if he hadn't been the specific person who happened to remember a single obscure data signature from a simulation a year earlier, the crew would have had no way to restore power in time. If Alan Bean hadn't asked about that switch during a training exercise months before, if he hadn't been curious enough to remember the answer, Aaron's instruction would have meant nothing. Two people, two moments of accidental preparation, standing between 3 astronauts and a dead spacecraft falling toward the Atlantic. NASA investigated for months. The conclusion was clear. The launch should never have happened in those weather conditions. The decision to proceed had been wrong. New launch commit criteria were written specifically because of Apollo 12. Criteria that are still in use today. Every time a rocket sits on a pad waiting for clouds to clear, it's because of what happened on November 14, 1969. Pete Conrad, Alan Bean, and Dick Gordon went on to complete their mission. Bean became the 4th human to walk on the moon. Conrad walked beside him. Nobody outside NASA talked much about what happened at T+36 seconds. The moon landing was the story. The lightning was a footnote. But for the people in that control room, for John Aaron, who gave the right call at the right moment, it was never a footnote. It was the 52 seconds that almost ended everything. And almost nobody talks about it. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe. Next week. What happens to your body when you fall into a neutron star? 36 seconds. That's how long Apollo 12 had been in the air when the first bolt hit.